Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show on parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as always, well, sometimes always, are my are my co-hosts Keith Bogan
Oh yeah, it's gonna be a morning.
and Dave Dusenberry.
That it is.
And possibly, now that I just got a message from him saying he set his alarm for PM, we'll see, possibly Chad Holland.
He's the closer. He's coming in the last inning.
There were all bozos on this bus.
What a surprise.
Oh, wow.
Here I was about to give him an excuse of maybe with he's going to church or something this morning. No, he
It's funny. All right.
ay. So he may be in a second. We'll find out. So we're gonna let Keith introduce this topic because he's the one who came up with it and he worded it best. So Keith,
So, as a parent, there are times when things happen in when we're around our kids that there's the parent way to respond to something, and then there's the way you want to respond to something. For instance, don't let your girls watch this, Jason. If I'm pulled over by a police officer while I'm driving and the kids are in the car, I've always taught my kids to be respectful and all that. But what I really want to say is, fucking asshole, why are you pulling me over, you piece of shit? Because and in fact, there have been some times when there's been some healthy conversations between myself and the representative of the officer of the law, I'll put it that way, that have not been particularly pleasant, but have wound up with no ticket, which is very interesting. And that's just one example. Somebody cuts you off badly, sticking with driving, for example. Somebody cuts you off badly and you want to say, flip them the bird and you jag off and all that, but your kid's in the car. I know how I react. I know how I try to not do the wrong thing, if you will. We could go down the road of, if you're arguing with your spouse and the things you say, I don't want to do that because things here got tough. So, and I'm not proud of all the things that happened, during that period of time, either when the kids were in the room, that's for sure. But there are definitely times, especially when the kids are really young, and you think, okay, they look too little, they don't hear it, but they hear everything. I mean, even if they're 2 years old, 1 year old, they hear everything. I like any parent, I've wrestled with that over the years. I'm not sure if I'm any more successful or any less successful than the other parent, but I'm sort of curious to hear other people's experiences in that area. So I'll leave it at that, and then I'll chime in as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I was looking at the topic you suggested, it is the teaching of. I use the words learned skill a lot when we do our talks here, because I believe that when it comes to parenting, especially parenting from a male perspective, as we do, the stuff that we pass down to our kids is, some of it is innate, but most of it has to be learned skills, right? We have to teach, we have to be able to provide a good baseline for the way our kids approach whatever it is they're going to do as they go through life. And this is a great example of it, right? So in this case, for me, I read it as, this is the teaching of self-control. This is the teaching of not allowing your baser emotions to lash out when you really want them to, because kids will do that as an innate response. I know mine do. And teaching them the skills of pausing, looking at something, giving it a second before lashing out. This is one of the things that I tell my kids. One of my personal philosophies that I like to do is I like, I say, we should try to treat others the way we would want to be treated. And that doesn't necessarily mean the way that people are actually treating us. We should treat others the way we would want to be treated. So for me, I'm not a big fan of getting yelled at. I'm not a big fan of people lashing out at me and just throwing a bunch of heat at me in the heat of the moment for no reason. I like I like reasoned discussion. I like debate. I like back and forth on things to come to some sort of, if not compromise, at least mutual understanding. That's the way I like to do things. So when I engage with people, this is what I teach my kids. When you engage with people, treat them the way you would want them to treat you. You can use that example. That is something you have in your control. How they actually treat you, you have zero say over. But treat them the way you would want them to treat you. And see where that goes. For me, it works a lot of the time, and it's a way of engaging it's a way of reinforcing self-control. That's my experience.
It's almost as if we learn better self-control because we're parents, and maybe we wouldn't learn it as much if we weren't.
Yeah.
Mr. Holloway is joining us. All right.
It's true, because one of the things you hear a lot is it's having a skill is all well and good, but you don't really learn the skill until you have to teach it to somebody else. It's Chad.
It goes back to reptilian brains sometimes. And Chad's a psychologist, so he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Chad
and
has a
reptilian-
reptilian brain. That makes sense.
It's essentially humans sometimes lower brain functions.
Yep.
And sometimes that can take over impulsive. It's more field driven. Can be fear based at times. So yeah, at almost 13 and 10.
How did that happen? Oh my God, how did that happen?
There's a lot less, well, not a lot, a little less of that. A little less of saying things as a parent and saying them just as reactionary. Not with Elise really, but with certain aspects of somebody cuts you off. Yeah, I'm not going to be nice about it. I'm not going to sugarcoat that now.
Well, I think if somebody cut you off and Elise was in the passenger seat, she'd be the first one to flip the bird before you would. So I get that. That's totally
Yeah. No. Yeah, I don't. This is not the time at times on this planet now to sugarcoat things. So it's not always easy, but I'm not just not want to sugarcoat a lot of things. So there's things that are said when at times that maybe shouldn't be said, but just the way it is.
As I say good morning to Dr. Holloway, I also found that I learned how to admit that I was wrong better when I had kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree, right? So, one of the things we talk about is parenting from our perspective, from a male perspective, as opposed to, the female side. Historically, the roles are, the female archetype is more emotionally based, and the male archetype is more reserved, more analytical, blah 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 blah. Right? That's the stereotype, historical baseline of all this stuff. Especially being in a single parent household, now with my kids, with all three of my kids, I've had to kind of figure out how to take on both of those roles, because in my house, you're going to have You can't just have straight analytical thought. You got to have emotional based teaching too. And how do you balance those two and have them work in harmony? And this is one of those things, like your case example is a good one. You know, um, there is a way to be able to, and this is the most important, I think, with my boys, is that, there are ways that you can choose to express yourself emotionally when you're feeling joy or sadness or fear or frustration or anger. There's ways that you can do it without it being destructive either to others or to yourself. There's ways that you can channel that so that there's ways so that it's not um so that it becomes not net negative, but maybe sometimes you could actually use it as a net positive depending on how it's channeled. My older son does it through music. My younger son does it through he does it through video games and some of his other stuff, His they take those outlets and use them to be able to channel their emotions that they're
Constructively.
feeling,
Yeah.
and I'm a musician, right? So I've done that for a long time. I've always said that, my bandmates refer to me as human Prozac, right? I'm the rah-rah guy in the band, right? So, but it's funny, and people who know me generally as a happy, upbeat kind of guy. The one thing that I love about playing music is that I can get up on stage for 40 plus minutes a night, beat the ever living hell out of my bass, swing my head with reckless abandon, scream my freaking lungs out, and it's cathartic. Like I get done, and whatever feelings I have being pissed off, I get out through that music. I did it when I was listening to it when I was a teenager. I do it now when I play it. And that's a way that I've always used to channel that anger and frustration out in a way that's not necessarily going to hurt anybody,
Positive.
but
Positive.
but it's positive. So that's something that I try to teach to my kids when it comes to dealing with like emotional responses that they're having. Like there's ways that you could do this. You don't have to be a robot. There's ways that you could do this that could be a positive.
I get all my negative
Very good
emotion
point.
out watching local football. That's a good point.
Yep.
And
Same here.
actually, usually I get mine out when I go to the gym.
Yeah.
And I lift weights. I call it iron therapy.
Yep.
I really got to go today because I'm upset with something or whatever. But I go and I train. I go, okay. But now it's kind of a non-issue.
Yep.
Something was huge before I went. An hour and a half later, it's like nothing.
Yep.
Well, what Keith is skipping over is the fact that the local football team that he roots for causes a lot of the problems.
Yes.
Cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
Well, and you notice I said
Well,
local football teams because they both suck royally, so it's okay.
Well, and talking about emotion and driving, I remember one time Frankie was like 5 years old, and we're in a part of St. Louis at that time where we're merging onto one of the interstates or something. But it's just like a whole bunch of there's a lot going on, at that part. And Frankie's like sitting in his car seat in the back, one of those elevated seats, and I hear him go, "Hey, Dad, I think this is one of your friends." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, he's waving at you." And the guy was flipping me off. The guy was super angry, giving me the finger. He goes, "He's waving at you." I go, "Yeah, I don't know about that."
That's funny.
But and then to your point, Keith, you said since you've become a dad, it's easier for you to say you're sorry. And I think for me, it's like as I have aged, I'm a lot more honest, and I think can own my feelings, if you will. And I have no problem saying I did that wrong or I should have done that. Even kind of from a logical sense, but especially if I get upset about something and do something, yell or whatever, then I'm like, I probably shouldn't have done that. Sorry, sorry about that. That probably wasn't the right way to handle that particular case or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, like ownership and accountability is such a big thing with me. Like it's a huge topic with me and my kids. And if I'm not able to express myself to them when I screw up, because I do, then I'm just a freaking hypocrite. Like that's dumb. The best way to teach is to live what you're teaching and show every day what you're teaching without thinking about it if possible, because that's the honest side of this stuff that we teach our kids that they pick up on. When they know that you're not like in dad mode, or talking about something, they just see you interacting without necessarily being watched, and they see the way you work. I believe this with my kids. Is they see the way I interact with people, and without necessarily having to think, just what comes naturally. That I think sinks in sometimes more than the actual like express lessons that I get across to them, because they see what comes naturally and they're like, oh, I mean, it's one thing to learn, okay, yeah, I should do that, but how do I actually do that? But to see it in practice, it's like, oh, okay, that actually can be done.
Right.
I
And I
think
think
you say that because Justin in particular, but both of the boys have come to me to the networking events that I have hosted over the years. Not a lot of them, but enough where they've seen me in my element, if you will, where I know they're present, but I go off and I do my own thing, but I know they're watching. Um, and it has no impact on me. I have a certain persona that I'm me.
Yeah.
There's nothing fake about me at all at my events, and so they get to see me, quote unquote, at work, quote unquote, amongst non-family members a lot.
Uh-huh.
And we've hosted a few parties here over the years where they've seen similar things where I get a little more raw than I normally would because I'm more relaxed and more natural and all that.
Yeah.
And I've never hid in front of the kids or anything like that. Yeah,
Mhm.
they probably are picking up more from that than they are from, so this is how you do it now.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
my kids have seen me play on stage. They're used to seeing me as the dad type with the horrible jokes and the, hey, clean up your room and the follow-ups and blah, 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 and the intellectual discussions that we do. But they've also seen, like I said, when I play, that's where I let my emotional side go out and I beat the ever living hell out of my instrument and have a good time. And they've seen me perform. And it's a lot different than what they see around the house.
Those poor
And
kids.
I know. That's probably, if I'm going to be written up for abuse charges, that's going to be the path that it's going to take. But they've seen that, and what I like to hope is when they see me do that, it makes them know, okay, there are places that you can express yourself this way that makes it okay. Like take that and go with it. Find your way to get that stuff out, whatever way it is, as long as it's hopefully not beating the shit out of somebody, unless you go into professional fighting, and then
Right.
it's okay.
Well, yeah.
There's rules.
Or politics. Politics is the same thing, but whatever.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that, and I've seen fights where two people beat the ever-loving shit out of each other, and they're best friends,
Uh-huh.
before and after it.
Yep.
Are you talking about Dallas against Philadelphia again? Because that's basically what it is.
They do that actually. A lot of the players at the end of the games, they high five, they hug, they get together, and they're like, you are. I mean, I'm sure Chad knows this. For being involved in things that are competitive. For that span of time, you are competitive against the people you're competing with. Before
Right.
and after, you hug, you go out, you grab beers, and you just chill. It's just you're able to compartmentalize your crazy level of emotion to that one set period of time, get it all out so that you could be yourself between before and after.
Well, we've gotten a couple of examples when it comes to that in the NFL. One of them is an example of obviously the Kelsey brothers you have, but I mean they're both offensive players, so there's no interaction. But if you look at an example like the Buffalo Bills, if Buffalo plays Dallas, there could be a head-to-head because you'd have Stephon Diggs on one side, his brother Trayvon on the defensive side. Well, not this year, but that definitely could easily happen, and it has happened, and it's happened where it's led to blows between players who actually end up being brothers. I've seen it where they've actually fought. We've all seen it, but it's always going to be something like that. There's always something like that. Trying to think of the one there was one recently where when they were in their primes fought twice, and really it was not always there was never a friendly relationship, was Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva. And
What
in a
sport are we talking
recent
about?
MMA.
UFC.
UFC. Yeah.
in a recent, they were together recently, and Anderson Silva said, "So why'd you never come to my barbecue?" And Chael openly admitted, he's like, "I thought you were kidding."
I thought you were a dick, actually.
And he's like, "No, I was serious." He's like, "No, really, you should have came." And he's like, "Oh, okay, next time I will." And I mean, but there's always those rivalries of relationships that can change. Then you get some of these rivalries where there is the relationship never changes to an extent. To an extent, I mean, there was apparently he wasn't joking. It didn't sound. It never sounded like he was joking around when the comment when Muhammad Ali was running with the Olympic torch in '96, and Joe Frazier's comments about him lighting himself on fire, and Joe didn't laugh.
Yep.
So sometimes the relationship doesn't change, and that was 25 years later. So
Yeah, I mean, you take those examples, and like for my kids, there's a couple ways you could go about it. Look, you're not, and I tell my kids, you're not going to get along with everybody that you talk with, that you interact with. You're going to have some people that are absolute dickheads. Like, that's just the nature of life. Statistically, it's impossible to get along with everybody that you meet because of the number of people out there. But it's how you handle. It's both how you handle the ones that you like and the ones that you don't like. There's a way that you could go about doing both of those that kind of showcases your individual character. It showcases your individual principles, and there's ways that you could go about doing that that isn't destructive to you or to others. And that is, again, that's all built on choice. It's built on working on and working through that initial emotional reaction, and how do you get through that? How do you approach it from a better way? Which is kind of like the topic that Keith was talking about. And like I said, it's a skill that I try to practice, but it's a lot harder it's something that gets reinforced now that I have to teach it to my little ones, without a doubt.
And back to what we were talking about earlier with sports, I see that a lot too. Like people who are on the same college teams, then you see them in the pros, and it's like, because that's kind of it's a very intense, I think, and I don't want to say traumatic, but it's an intense experience, I think, being on a college team and preparing for those games, going through the practices and putting all the commitment and blood, sweat, and tears into it. So when you see them on the pro fields, it's like, hey, first off, hey, we've made it to the pros now, right? And it's good to see you, man. I'm glad we can play together. So I think a lot of times that really helps as well. And then for me, like personally, like I've had in the past, I used to have a pretty long shit list, if you will. But I would say right now, I mean, probably since I've been probably 30, it really had, like, there was one person who was on it for a little while. But he dropped off after he died. So
yeah,
death excuses people from the shit list. I have to.
Yeah, I mean, he stayed on it for a little bit after he died, but he eventually got off.
That's a good way to call the lineup a little bit.
What's that?
I said that's a good way to call the lineup a little bit. That's that's reasonable.
Yeah.
But you're going right down the path of forgiveness. That's very interesting. How does your ability to one thing to take responsibility and admit you're wrong about things, that for me that's grown as when after I had kids, I found it one of the things I learned how to do better. Although I'll openly admit, and I'm sure I would have testimony to this effect, it's never been easy for me to admit that I was wrong. I was raised in an environment where my father literally never said he was wrong. So it was very much a learned skill for me. But forgiveness is the other side, is another piece of that. And does your ability to forgive those who trespass upon you, so to speak, improve when you are a parent and you're trying to demonstrate that skill for your kids?
I think so. I think so. I definitely think so. Because the one thing I've learned, especially being in some of the interactions and situations that I have, especially amongst, with my kids and parental units, is that, there's obviously been friction there. That's why we're not together now. But when it comes to forgiveness, so forgiveness kind of runs with two other things, right? So you have pride, which factors heavily into that, because forgiveness and pride can kind of run counter to each other sometimes, right? We have this sense that we were wrong and we're going to kind of hold on to that. That impacts forgiveness, right? That's been a really hard battle for me to both learn and express to my kids. I don't like to demonize people. When I've been pretty hardcore wronged, and it's learning not to demonize people that have wronged me in such a strong way has been hard, because the audience that I'm trying to express forgiveness, boundaries, whatever word you want to use, right, for my kids, and not demonize other folks. That's been it's been humbling to learn. It's saying that people are entitled to their stances and their opinions and their approaches to things. I don't agree with it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they feel that they're wrong in their heads. They made their choices that they felt they needed to make. I have zero impact on that. That is kind of understanding where my place is and not pushing myself onto those things to say, this is where that stuff stops. So what I'm hoping is that teaches my kids is that people can have different approaches and thoughts and opinions on given things, and radically different thoughts and approaches and opinions on things. And that's, at the end of the day, that's fine. How you deal with that, for me, in my case, it's setting strong boundaries. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to interact. These are the rules of play, right? And the hardest part of that is the self-forgiveness and the dealing with the after effects of pride from all of that, because hurtful acts linger for a while, and I still battle with it to this day. But being open about that, both within myself and where appropriate, with my boys, is a big part, I think, of that healing process and getting to the point where I could be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think I've had situations like that too, where, either my fault or the other person's fault. We've had whatever tension it is, but as I've aged, and one thing I try to teach my son and my kids is that you have to be able to forgive, because it could be, it doesn't, just because you had a falling out, today's point, it could be that everybody's entitled to have their own opinions.
Yeah.
It could be that, that person had a bad day, or I had a bad day. Things build up and you get pressures and stresses, and you might say some things that you don't necessarily mean. But it makes your life, as a person who's harboring this stress and this against somebody, much easier if you can forgive them as well. Because that's another thing. It's like you just let it go and you feel so much better. It's a lot easier than being pissed off all the time at somebody,
I've heard it said that, like, what's the word? The concept of vengeance and all of that stuff. It's like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a very, very good point on that one. We could do a whole probably 2.5, 3 hours, maybe more on anger and things like that. And and being reactionary to it. What'd you say?
That's the next show. And by the way, I could be the speaker the entire time. So,
we have one topic we do have to eventually get to, and I have a feeling there's going to be some feelings of resentment and anger that comes through and out of that show. Like there may be parts where when the show's over, we may not all be speaking. I will openly admit that.
Wait a minute, Jason, again?
Well, I mean, there's a topic that has come up in discussions in schools, and it's being debated, and a hot button issue when it comes to parenting and things like that. And and it's everywhere. It's not just parts of this discussion are in every facet on the planet right now. And that is word usage of what people want to be called and things like that.
The ability to be able to model in front of our kids and have the open conversation.
Right.
The challenging part, not necessarily what stand we take per se, but whether or not we can have that open conversation. I remember one of my favorite moments in the development of Justin. I'll say this, but heaven knows that now that we post this stuff openly, he's probably going to watch this. And Jason and Dave, you were both present for it. You just don't realize it. Do you remember the party in my backyard? Was it 3 or 4 years ago? First time I met Dave in person.
2.
And
Yep.
We
were talking MCU. I remember that in the backyard. Yep.
Right, but there was also my friend Janet and my friend Gary were here, and Janet is very far left. And Gary is not very far right, but he's definitely right of center.
Yeah.
And they were having an interesting conversation, which actually stayed very level. But at that point, Justin and the woman he was dating at the time very strongly did not agree with what Gary was saying. And they couldn't stay. They literally had to walk out and leave because they
I remember that.
Couldn't tolerate the other opinion. But I've noticed Justin in more recent times, he's like most kids, he's starting to, okay, I can hear what you're saying, even if you are Satan and I hate your guts and all that, but he doesn't necessarily leave the room as much. And I wonder how much of that was his own development and how much of that was me trying, because I've been squawking for a long time. I get what you're feeling, but some people feel differently. And the key to it is, having the conversation. So I think more of it is just his own maturation, but I think some of it must have been me having some impact. I think, he finally figured out that you can listen, if you will.
Yeah, I'm sure you're a big part of that, Keith.
Yeah.
I mean, look at some of the conversations that you and I have. We're pretty close on some things. We're pretty far apart on others.
Yeah.
But
I have no idea what you're talking about, Chad, but okay.
Well, you're very close on hairstyles.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. We're very close on hairstyles.
Especially Frankie and my boys, they all want to shave their heads because of it. It's exactly
but I think that, but your point too, that is maturing and that ability to mature and to participate in conversations with people who disagree. That's part of this whole diversion thing. Diversity. If you want diversity in your life, that's the value of it, is having other opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you just have one way of thinking in your life, that's a very dangerous track to go down, I think.
I've been more successful teaching my kids that than I have necessarily employers that I've been part of. Not necessarily my current employer, but in general, some employers, all they want is the way they think, and that's it. And that's a very dangerous thing for sure.
So for me, like when I one of the things that, and I do this all the time, right? My kids are used to seeing this. And I'm sure you guys have experienced this too. When there's something that I don't understand, or if there's an opinion or a viewpoint that I don't agree with, the first thing that I want to do is I want to understand why. Where does that opinion come from? What is it based in? I'm searching for a level of context, I guess, of where a given point comes from. Because if I can understand the context, maybe I can understand what came out of it a little bit better. And even if I don't agree with it, at least I can understand where it's rooted in, right? So instead of reacting emotionally for things, I ask questions. I ask a lot of questions. And because one thing I try to tell my kids is, before you fly off the handle on a given thing, understand what the hell it is that you're reacting to, because you may not know. You may be hearing something, but not actually understanding the context of it, right? So this is a skill that came up all the time as I was raising my kids, because my boys especially would get to a disagreement. Let's just call it that, right? So, Keith, you have 2 boys. You understand that they don't always see eye to eye, and sometimes they have a little bit of a conflict on it, right? So this has happened amongst my boys. So and it's funny. I think this one tactic has worked better to develop their empathy and pausing to understand what the heck is going on more than anything else. Because whenever they get into a fight, they would come to me. He said this. He said that. I didn't say this. I didn't say that. Blah, 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 blah. The first thing I tell them is, both of you go upstairs, take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, come down, give me one story. I want one story. Talk it out, figure it out amongst yourselves, but come down and give me one story. And then I make them give me one story. Each of them talks a little bit and they give me one story, because what that tells them is we need to get together and see from each other's perspective what the hell just happened, because we have to agree, because we have to present it to dad. And I think that one parenting tech, and I don't know where the hell that came from, but it just made sense to me at the time, because I don't want to have to deal with this stuff. Clearly, you guys are seeing things from different worlds. Okay, take the time, talk to each other, ask each other questions, work each other out. Come down and give me one story. One thing happened. One thing happened that caused this break. All I want to know is what that one thing was. Very simple request that I think reinforces some of these lessons of stopping, pausing, actually listening and processing what the other person is saying from their own reality, and then coming down and talking to me about it.
So far intellectual, so far beyond what I would have done. That's way too highbrow for me, because I think one of the earliest points of parenting disagreement, and we didn't parent, my wife and I don't think parenting was the focus of why we didn't work as a couple, but we didn't always agree either. And one of the biggest differences early on was, like you say, Dave, the boys would be boys, and start fighting, like physically mauling each other. And of course, Justin was much bigger for most of the early years. And she would, that's unnatural. That's horrible. They have to stop right away. They should never, ever hurt each other. They should never wrestle. And my answer was, I would pick up my cup of tea. I'd stand up and I'd say very quietly to the boys, no blood, and I'd leave the room.
Yeah.
That was the only thing my only rule was, you can kick the crap out of each other, you just can't draw blood. You can imagine that her viewpoint and my viewpoint were very different.
Slightly a little different.
And I really feel like Dave's was right in the middle, which is probably where we both should have been.
Maybe Dave should have been your fucking mediator for your relationship. Oh, right.
Well, clearly my skills didn't work so well on my relationship, so don't take what I have as gospel.
But I've seen something similar to that, even with Valentina, my daughter, and my nephew Miles. So we went to see to Frankie's graduation in Phoenix, and we all were at Frankie's house. It's got it's a big student area, but they had a big pool, so we're all like, hey, let's go to the pool. So we're in the pool. So here comes my nephew splashing, and he's calling Valentina Flatty Patty. Hey, Flatty Patty, because she's flat, right?
Yep.
But he's coming out, and he's I want to say 7 years younger than his older brother. So they didn't have much time together. So Valentina just gets splashed, goes over, grabs it, and so she's 13, and I think he was 10 at the time, something like that. Grabs the kid by the face, just shoves him underwater. I mean, it was like overwhelming, like shock and awe, right? So then she let him go.
That's fine. I have no problem with that.
And he came up, and he starts crying then, and asking for his grandma, right? So, but I'm like, okay, here's what's going to happen. I said, first off, we've got to get Miles toughened up to this stuff, so if he knows that if he can dish it out, he needs to be able to take it. There's a lesson there, right? I said the other lesson is that Valentina needs to understand that he may be smaller right now, but in a year or two, he might be bigger than her and stronger than her, and the tables will turn very quickly. So that can have a devastating impact on the outcome of those things as well. So I'm with I guess I'm on the kind of Keith side, like, just as long as there's no blood, nobody gets hurt too bad, we're okay.
Yeah.
But because it gives them a chance to kind of work it out themselves.
I grew up with 3 brothers, and it was perfectly natural that we were all fighting, physically fighting all the time. These teeth aren't real because they got knocked out. So and my parents weren't really happy about that, by the way. It wasn't cheap by any means, but that's probably where I learned no blood from, because when blood was spilled, it got expensive. So I wasn't really protecting the kids. I was protecting my wallet, for crying out loud.
And your carpet.
And that's a whole different story. That's so funny. The one time we actually agreed, because she sort of came around to my view over the years, and I remember we're over for the holidays at her parents, and they had just gotten new white carpet over the summer. So it's December, and the kids are all, and there's friends over, and so there's a bunch of kids in the basement, like 6 kids, and we hear them playing and having a good time, and then suddenly we don't hear anything, and then we hear screaming. And Jeremy comes upstairs. There's her parents, her brother and sister-in-law, and some other friends, and we're all just quietly having some wine in the living room. And we hear Jeremy saying, "Mom, Mom." And she and I are both facing the other way, and she says, "I don't want to hear it. Unless there's any blood, I don't want to hear it." Mom, Mom. And we turn around, and he's got blood pouring down his head. Wait, the best part of the story was the first thing she said was, "Get off the carpet." She wasn't worried about him. Get off the carpet. So I guess she came around on that one point. She came around to my thinking, and she and I, for years, we laughed about that too, because she recognized totally that the carpet was more important. They had been swinging like a garden hoe or something like that in the basement, and one of the kids clipped his head, and of course, forehead things, they bleed like sons of bitches. Oh yeah, and the boys know that story really well too. It's really funny, but yeah, get off the
old dodge the garden hoe. Luckily, I never played that.
Yeah, well,
Hey, grew up on a farm.
we have to learn to dodge the hoe more often. You know what I mean? Oh, anyway, no.
Wait, you're supposed to dodge the hoe? I didn't get those instructions. All right, well,
There's the left turn in the brick wall.
Right down the garden path. Yeah, that's for sure. But that's a different show. But we're
I was
not
going to say that too.
I think
Thank
that's
you,
not one that's
everybody.
going to be recorded.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning into Dads on Life. These are the pertinent topics that we talk about on the show.
Oh God. Okay. Well, anyway, it's been rather entertaining. There's obviously a lot of different viewpoints on how to curb your frustration in front of your kids. I'll tell you that. I mean, certainly there's been a lot of times, and like I said, some of the times, if I'm arguing with my spouse, it's a different argument, likely, if they're in the room or if they're in the house. Than if I'm driving in a car and someone cuts me off, I learned early on not to flip the bird. I think they were very young. They weren't with me at the time, but I did. I cut someone off, and they started honking wildly, and gesturing. I could see it in my rearview mirror, so I flipped the bird. Turned out to be an undercover cop. Not a good idea. Don't want to do that again. 2 tickets later. Yeah, that wasn't one of my shining moments. So you learn the hard way not to do stupid things.
Kids, this is what accountability looks like.
Yes. And by the way, I have told my boys that, well, particularly Justin. I've told Justin that story because he drives a lot, and I've made sure you no matter what you do, you just don't flip the bird, because you don't know who it's going to be. Either it's going to be somebody with a loaded gun, or it's going to be somebody with a loaded gun and a badge. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. It is interesting how our kids teach us how to become accountable more, become more forgiving, become better at channeling our emotions in a healthier way. If you're paying, and that doesn't work for all parents. It doesn't. Some parents don't care that their kids are there, and they frustrate me as much as anyone. You know, their kids are standing right there, and they're just I'm going to be me. That's it. I don't care. I'm going to be me. Well, you're a parent now, and
Like
me has to grow. Me has to mature, if you will.
there's a lack of empathy there. That's one of those three key pillars that I like to talk about, right? You have trust, empathy, and communication are the three key pillars of any relationship, whether it's familial, spouse, partner, whatever. Those three things work in concert, tandem together, and you have to have all three in balance. Communication, being able to speak and receive and process, builds understanding, which promotes empathy and builds trust. They all kind of compound and work on each other. And you have to teach that to your kids. Like you have to teach that in the way that you express it yourself in your interactions with others, because kids are sponges. They soak in what they see, and they initially they try to, they want to emulate it, or they imitate it, because they don't understand what causes it. But then as they develop understanding, it becomes a core part of who and what they are. And that's something that's something I talk a lot about too with my kids, is that keep those three things in mind with every interaction you have. Again, you may not agree. That's fine. But those three things can still hold as long as you keep conscious of them, and you're willing to engage in them.
Absolutely, for sure. Jason, you got anything else to add, Chad?
Not particularly.
Jason silenced. What's up with that?
We've we actually need to go look back at some of the shows we've done, especially early on, and rehash them because Dave wasn't here. See if things change. There's one in particular I remember. And it was pretty much a show specifically about it's and theys and things like that. That was we did a show very early on, about pronouns and things like that. And
oh yes,
yeah, it was pretty interesting. It was, like I said, it was definitely in 2020. Because it was when we did the string of them, where it was like, I think we were here like 40 days, 40 shows out of 52 that first year. So there was like I said, we got to go back and rehash some of those, and scan for future topics for the next upcoming couple of months, which is going to be a little scattered, because we have with Sadie Wrestling, there's tournaments all over the place and all the time now.
Goes without Jason. Yeah, that works for me. Good. All right. Yeah,
so this will probably, I don't think this will be the last show this year. Maybe we'll squeeze in one or two more. Maybe we'll do one this Saturday afternoon before Christmas instead of doing Sunday morning, which is Christmas Eve.
You don't want to do one on Monday? I'm confused.
We are the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Hey, listen.
Anyway.
Listen, on Monday, I'm not going to have a whole lot to do, so why not? I'm available. Come on. I don't get it.
I'll be waking up. I'll be waking up on a beach in this place that you see behind me.
Very nice. Listen, the internet works everywhere. It's okay.
I'll probably be right around now. I'll probably be firing up the grill to start the rotisserie. So I'll have some time to sit around and do nothing. So
I had an image of Jason spinning on a rotisserie. Holy cow! What do you know?
I think I saw that movie.
Yes.
Okay, Lord of the Flies.
And on that note,
I think that's pretty much a good place to leave us for today, as we're pretty much pushing about 50 minutes at this point. 42 for Chad.
And about 68 for Dave and myself. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Speak of the bird, look at the birdie, Keith. Look at the birdie.
The birdie's so
Um,
sweet. I like it.
So from all of us here at Dad's on Life, take care, everybody. And of course, Keith, eat my shorts.
Chomp chomp, brother. Chomp chomp.
Have a good one, guys.
Take care.